David Lynch's often discussed, often decorated, and often despised Dune in my mind is not only a failed attempt at adapting Herbert's novel, but an incomprehensible failed film in general. Either way, I love it on some level, somehow. Let's discuss. We open with Princess Irulan looking straight down the lens of the camera, straight into our very souls. She's just bombarding us with complex exposition that I'm sure immediately alienates anybody who is not familiar with Herbert's work.
The Spacing Guild and its navigators, who the spice has mutated over 4,000 years, use the orange spice gas, which gives them the ability to fold space.
We then cut to a computer program that further bombards us with exposition in an uncomfortable manner. I think The Fellowship of the Ring is the best example I can think of a prologue that introduces an unknowing audience to this deep, expansive lore and mythology, but is also exciting at the same time and keeps you interested. These two prologues here do the complete opposite. They're confusing, they're jarring, they're odd, and they're not exciting.
Spice mining. Carryalls lower the harvester to the sand and lift it off to safety when a worm attacks. Worms attack all rhythmic vibrations. Weather. See storms.
I have to say, I was actually hooked with the first sequence in the film. Once a Spacing Guild navigator arrives to the Emperor, the sets and the tone and all the designs and the aesthetics are really nice. And this big practical arrival of the Spacing Guild navigator, like, I don't even know what you'd call it. This big huge scene that comes in. It's a sight to behold. I know you don't see a fully formed Spacing Guild navigator to Dune Messiah. It's a movie. They're changing it, okay? So I have to say, one of the reasons that I love this film is I am a fan of David Lynch. Twin Peaks was amazingly weird and surreal and incredibly well executed. I also watched Eraserhead about a decade ago and it had a profound and disturbing effect on me, and Blue Velvet, and I've watched most of his films, I think. I'm also a fan of his weather reports that he does daily for the California weather.
Here in LA, cloudy morning, very slight breeze blowing, 61 degrees Fahrenheit, around 16 Celsius.
So maybe that's one of the reasons I don't hate this film. I think also now that we do have a adequate adaptation of Herbert's novel with Denny's film, there's no reason to hate this movie. I mean, it's a complete mess, but it's also cheesy and funny and weird and disgusting to such a degree that it becomes an interesting oddity.
You set the tab on your heart and you get a feeling. You get a feeling for what you're focusing on. Then you set the tab on your brain and you get a thinking of what is going on with what you're focusing upon. And you put those two things together and it can help you indicate the next move.
So those two first prologues should be completely cut. They were actually added in after once Lynch had left and the producer started the editing of the film, because obviously no one knew what the fuck was going on in this movie, so they tried to make more sense of it with these two prologues, but they just need to be cut. They're worthless, they're confusing, and they're jarring. You just need to open up with a Spacing Guild member arriving. It's big, it's epic, it's grand, and it does give context into this world and how it functions. Also, the Spacing Guild members here, their costumes are made out of body bags from a morgue, and they were actually used to keep the bodies. Lynch had this idea apparently, and the actors wearing them had no idea that they were actually used body bags. So that's just another weird insane reason why I love Lynch. He's fucking batshit crazy, yeah. We're then introduced to our false prophet Paul, and there's even more exposition here, making those two intros even more void. And Kyle MacLachlan, I'm a fan of him from Twin Peaks. As Dale Cooper, he was great. I haven't seen him in a lot of other things. I think he does okay as Paul. He's obviously too old, but they aged him up, and that's fine. They do that in a lot of things, or age people down. If you look at Frodo, for example. I mean, I think he does alright with the script given to him. He's not amazing, he's not brilliant, but for what he was given on the page, he's reasonable at it. I like Kyle MacLachlan, so I enjoy seeing him here. I don't think he does a great job of portraying Paul, but I don't necessarily think that was his fault as an actor. I think Paul probably wasn't on the page how he was in the page of the books, if we're talking about the film script. So he's doing what he can. He's fine.
They will call me Muad'Dib.
The most iconic Patrick Stewart plays Gurney Halleck, and there's a funny story about how he was cast here. The original actor who was going to play Gurney pulled out at the last moment, like 3 days before shooting was going to begin. And apparently Lynch got Patrick Stewart confused with a different Patrick Stewart, and they called this Patrick Stewart, who rocked up on set, and then everyone realized, oh, that's not the guy that Lynch wanted. But by that point it was too late, so they just had to use it, which is hilarious. He also tells a great story about meeting Sting on set and just having no context as to popular music at all. He had no idea of the Police's existence. And I'll cut in a little clip here, but it's just classic Patrick Stewart. I absolutely love the guy. He's iconic sci-fi actor that will last decades and decades after he's gone as one of the most brilliant and amazing actors in sci-fi. He's amazing.
No, I'm in a band. And I said, oh, what kind of band? He said, the Police. Folks, I said, you play in a police band?
Obviously, the shields haven't aged at all. They still look as terrible as they did 40 years ago.
Guard yourself for truth.
I think one of the most egregious and offensive divergences from the book is turning the weirding way into the weirding module. Lynch was quoted as saying he didn't want to see Kung Fu in space, but that sounds fucking amazing. What the fuck? Lynch wasn't a fan of the novel before he was hired as the director of this film, and there is some elements within the film that show that he didn't really appreciate or understand the source material. Some aspects he got and understood, others he didn't, and he was just a director trying to convey his own vision more than Frank Herbert's, which is fair enough. I mean, he's the director making the film. But yeah, the weirding module is dumb and stupid, and it deflates the Bene Gesserit's significance as much as you possibly could deflate their significance.
Precise control.
Lynch's main avenue of expression is surrealism. If you've seen any of his movies or any of his paintings, you'll know that he really lives in that obscure, divergent, weird, odd, dark realm. He pulls off surrealism incredibly well, and he's probably one of the greatest surrealist film directors of all time, if not the best surrealist film director of all time. His paintings are also quite good. So it's interesting to see him here and how he takes Paul's visions, and it's obviously an element that he understood and enjoyed, and they're executed quite well. They're weird and surreal and dark and Lynchian.
But what?
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
I think the Gob Jabba sequence is faithful to the book. I think it holds that level of terror and fear in this young boy who's going through this intense moment of testing his manhood.
Heat upon heat upon heat. Silence! Silence!
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration.
I like the shots where you actually see Paul's hand burning away. In the book, you're completely in Paul's head as he's going over these thoughts, thinking about how his hand will look like a cooked, gnarled piece of meat. There's also a moment in the book where Paul hesitates to pull his hand away, fearing to see how fucked up and destroyed it will be. And Kyle MacLachlan delivers this moment very well, in my opinion. I like that little touch that was straight from the book.
Do it!
The first half of the film does seem to try to include this plethora of complex themes, ideas, and narrative machinations. I don't know if somebody unfamiliar with the source material would be following the film up until the halfway mark, and then once we get into the second half of the film, well, we'll get there. Brad Dourif is amazing, and he's amazing in everything he is, and he's been in so many iconic franchises at this point that he'll just be remembered as an absolute icon. He doesn't get a lot of screen time here, but for the moments he gets, he does a really good job at Part of the Breeze. He has been in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is an amazing role and an amazing film. He was in The Lord of the Rings. He was in Alien Resurrection. He is amazing as the Doctor in Deadwood. He had this role in Star Trek Voyager for about 3 or 4 episodes, which he was brilliant in. I know there's a million other things I'm forgetting, but yeah, my love for Brad Dourif is immense.
It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stains, stains become a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion.
I think it's fair to say that in all 3 live adaptations of Dune, they've taken the Baron and they've kind of enhanced his intensity. In the book, he has this overwhelming sense of danger, but he's rather subdued. For the most part, he just sits and has conversations with people. But in this film here, they've taken the Baron and they've just turned him up to fucking not even 11, like fucking 10,000. He turns from dark and intense and intimidating to hammy and silly. The whole family of Harkonnens here are just hammy and ridiculous and over the top. The scene where the Baron kills the flower boy is batshit fucking insane. Baron's bathing in the oil, that tremendous score by Toto. He pulls the heart plug of this flower boy, the slave guy who's arranging flowers for some fucking reason, and just starts rubbing the blood all over him. I mean, it goes from intense to silly to almost funny. I think maybe it's so ridiculous and so over the top that it could be funny. It's certainly not serious. It's interesting. It's not boring. I don't know. It's just, wow. I mean, it's something else. Pug! Never frame a shot with the pug's face just cut out. What the fuck, David? Ah, there he is. Amazing. There's a moment in Dune Messiah where they explain how the Guild Navigator uses the spice to actually map out all these possible futures and find a possible future where these ships can travel at such a high, tremendous speed without crashing. So that is really interesting. It's not that they're using the spice to travel at these speeds, it's that they're actually using the spice to find a possible future where they can move at such speeds without crashing and dying. I thought that was a really interesting use of the spice in these books. Yeah, it's all about future sight and possible things that could come up. I mean, Herbert really did write a unique and interesting novel. The Guild Navigator sequence is so psychedelic and baffling and surreal and confusing. I'm sure everybody in the audience who wasn't familiar with the novels was completely confused and put off by the sequence, but I've read the novels, I know what's going on, so what's the problem? He's in the spice gas, then he floats up and he shoots the laser out of his mouth, then he shoots another laser out of his mouth, and he's surrounded by those wave things, and then he sees the future or something. It's all there. It's all there. I mean, it makes complete sense. Lynch was quoted as saying that he didn't want all the spaceship sequences to look like Star Wars, which is funny because all the spaceship sequences in this film look like flat 2D objects, and Star Wars, all the ship sequences looked dynamic and 3D and interesting. David Lynch was actually offered Return of the Jedi by George Lucas. Lucas didn't direct it, and he asked Lynch if he would do it, and he said no. I really wish he had of. He would have really turned that film into a confusing, surreal, intense, dark, fucked up movie. Could you imagine A New Hope and then Empire and then David Lynch's Dune, but it's Return of the Jedi? That would have been amazing. The Ewoks are just biting people's faces off. Either way, there is a lot of model work in this film that looks really good and really expensive and really dynamic, but for whatever reason, the space, everything in space, all the ships just looks terrible. And it really is Lynch just being a complete artist, 100%. He doesn't give a fuck about the audience. He's just trying to convey his fucking, his vision. And his vision isn't normal. It isn't expected. It's fucking weird and obscure and confusing sometimes. Duncan Idaho is barely in this film. He does nothing, nobody cares, and then he just dies randomly. He could have been completely cut out of the narrative and it wouldn't have mattered one iota. I can't believe it. They whitewashed Leah Kynes. She's an African American woman in a wheelchair in the book. What the fuck, David? So to give Lynch all the credit I possibly can give him, he did want to do a 3 to 4 hour cut of this film. That's what his original rough cut was, and that's what his script tried to capture, but the production company didn't want any part of it, and he ended up leaving the project, and then the producer made the final cut. I'm not sure if a 4 hour or 3 hour version of this film would be any better. I have a feeling that if Lynch had have actually gotten his way and done his 4 hour or 3 hour cut, that it would still be weird and confusing and nonsensical and Lynchian and not really an adequate adaptation of the book. But it's fair to say, when you sit down and watch this film, part of it is Lynch's vision, but the editing and the pacing and everything was taken away from him. They've asked him several times to come back and do a director's cut, but he's so disinterested in it. He doesn't even like to talk about this film in interviews, which is fair enough because it was a critical and financial failure and a black mark on his for a long time. He was critically acclaimed after Eraserhead and The Elephant Man, and then he did this, and it's a failure. I mean, this film is a fucking failure. And then after that, he never really went and tried to do a big Hollywood, big budget film ever again, which is sad. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that this terrible movie isn't all of Lynch's fault. Not that I'm saying that I think his 4-hour cut would have been a good movie. Probably wouldn't have, but credit where credit's due. This mess isn't entirely Lynch's fault, yeah?
But don't really need a checking stick, because every human being has what they call intuition, a thinking feeling. But this just helps focus that intuition and gives you maybe, perhaps, more of an indication of the next step in the work. In this case, I'm getting a feeling close but no cigar, and a thinking that I may have to destroy before I can get this thing to where I want it to be.
Ah! There he is, the man himself!
Spotter control. There's no sign of the carryall. It isn't answering.
I think the worm's attack on the sandcrawler is actually really good. It's faithful to the book, it's exciting, and the practical effects of the worm eating the crawler and it exploding in its mouth are really, really cool. It's hard not to compare it to Denny's version, which was made 40 years later and just is intense on 8 more levels. But that's not really a fair comparison, is it? This movie is 40 years old, and in 1984, I think it's a good sequence, and it stays faithful to the book. When you're adapting a book, normally what you do with all the inner monologues, which there are a lot of in most every book, is you turn them into dialogue, and you have that character explain that information to another character so the audience can understand it. But I think what happened with this film is they had it, and then Lynch left, and they cut it all together into 2 hours, and they're like, nobody knows what the fuck is going on. So later on, that's when they added the Irulan intro to try and explain the world of Dune, and the other intro, and that's when they started compiling all these voiceovers on top of all these sequences. And yeah, it's fair to say that it's not a typical thing that you do in a feature film, and it is really weird and odd that every character, a lot of the times, just has these voiceovers cut over the top. A lot of the time, just purposefully trying to explain what the fuck is going on to the audience.
I know she has come to test him. No man has ever been tested with the box.
Ye shall know your ways as if born to them.
We must be a friend, or in with them. He's studying us.
Yet, there's the imperial conditioning. Assurance and trust.
A hunter-seeker. Can't get me if I don't move.
So all of the Harkonnens have red hair in this film, because redheads are vile and reprehensible, I guess. What the fuck, David?
You are so beautiful, my Baron. Your skin, love to me.
The tooth.
A tooth.
The tooth.
A tooth.
Toto's score is often praised when this movie is spoken about, and that's because it's musically interesting and dynamic, and they obviously were great musicians and knew how to compose interesting and immersive music. And as far as the film goes, it enhances a lot of the big moments, like when House Atreides is attacked and destroyed, and it really leans into the weird, surreal moments with soft synths. And I think overall they encapsulated all these different elements of the films. We have big bombastic action, then we have odd surrealistic visions, and they were able to adequately convey all of that information through their score. Oh my god, Patrick Stewart has the pug in his jacket and he runs into battle with the jacket! This is the best scene in the film. This is the best scene in any Dune adaptation. This is one of the greatest cinematic moments of all time. Patrick Stewart with a pug in his jacket running into battle. Amazing. Considering its budget and the year of its creation, the battle between the Harkonnens and the Atreides and the Sardaukar is good. There's some explosions. The choreography is silly, but I mean, it's okay. It's okay. The sequence where the Baron is like, a little bit of spittle on you, I just want to put a bit of spittle on you, and spits on Lady Jessica, is so fucked up and weird and odd. Spoilers, but the Baron isn't aware of it, but Jessica is also his daughter, which brings it into a whole new realm of fucked upness. But yeah, Lynch just really wanted to make the Harkonnens disgusting and reprehensible, but I think he just pushes it too far. It's uncomfortable as an audience member in a lot of the sequences with the Harkonnens. Some of them are funny, but also dark and what the fuck and weird.
I want to spit once on your head. Just some spittle in your face.
For the most part, the events leading up to the destruction of House Atreides and the execution of Duke Leto are relatively faithful to the book, and I think the pacing is nice. You get most of the big story beats and elements that you need up until that point. It's interesting, the Duke in Lynch's version dies just after an hour from the film's start time, and the Duke in Denny's version dies pretty much at that exact moment, give or take. I think maybe in Denny's version the Duke dies at an hour 20, but that really illustrates how rushed the second half of this film is, considering that this film encapsulates the entirety of the first book, and Denny's movie only recreates the first half of the first book. So yeah, they both kind of have the Duke dying at an hour and 10, hour and 20, and then the Lynch film just rushes through the entirety of the rest of the fucking book in like an hour, and it's insane. If you're a fan of these books, one of the things that is greatest about them is their complexity and the level of detail that Herbert went into with writing all these interesting cultures and these complex characters and these philosophical messages of ecology and psychology and psychedelics and politics and charisma. And then, yeah, we have all these great iconic moments in the book that are just completely rushed through like a montage almost. So that is quite jarring for an audience member who's a fan of the source material. There are moments where the tone is rather serious and it is taking the subject matter seriously, like when the Duke is executed, for example. But then we just get the bombastic Baron once again with these hilarious Harkonnen hijinks, just spinning around in the air saying I'm alive, and it deflates the tension, the suspense, and becomes silly once again. We get this great spice vision with Toto's soft synth score over this weird, fucked up, dark imagery of the Baron's face decaying away and Aelia in the womb doing something, the water of life awakening her or something. It's very Eraserhead. If you haven't seen Eraserhead, it's worth a watch. It's not for everyone, that's for fucking sure. It was Lynch trying to convey all the fears he had about becoming a new father, and you can see elements of that here with Aelia in the womb. I mean, I don't know, it's fucked up and weird, but it's interesting. This movie is never boring. It's aggravating, but it's never boring.
Spoon holds my future.
there are some good sequences in this film, and I think overall visually it looks really nice and it looks really expensive. The sequence where Paul and Jessica are in the desert and the sandworm is accosting them, it's inherently 80s, but it's still suspenseful and well executed. It's just the narrative that is completely incomprehensible. The actor who plays Stilgar was from Twin Peaks, and I quite like the actor. But I mean, it's hard to even comment on Stilgar or Chaney. Chaney's played by Sean Young from Blade Runner, but I mean, they do okay in like the 20 seconds of screen time they get. But Stilgar and Chaney are such big, iconic characters in the novel that play such a big part in Paul's transition from Atreides to Muad'Dib. But I mean, how can you even comment on either of their performances or portrayals of these characters? They're just not in the fucking film barely. For what they're in, they do fine, but the characters are completely gutted.
You shall be known as Usul, which is the strength of the base of the pillar. This is your secret name in our troop.
The Baron yelling squeeze in Roban's face as he just chews meat and it's everywhere, and he ripped it from a cow that was dead and suspended from the roof while dwarves were cutting at it with grinders or something. I mean, it needs to be toned down. I get it. The Harkonnens are reprehensible, but this is just uncomfortable and confusing as a viewer. Like, I enjoyed the Baron in the TV miniseries. I enjoyed the Baron in Denny's film. He was amazing. But in Lynch's version, every time he's on screen, I'm just uncomfortable and put off, and the disease on his face and everything is just like, what the fuck am I watching?
I want you to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze! Give me spice!
Fade. It really does suck to see the Fremen and how they're portrayed in this film. There's so much time and effort into setting up their culture in the novel, and here they could be any generic tribal culture. I mean, we don't even get to see any of their like customs or attributes or anything. They're just random desert people. So there's this cat that's tied to this rat that's part of this machine that Thuthiya Howard needs to milk to get this antidote for a poison that the Baron gave him. I don't even know how to fucking comment on this. I don't even know. I guess I just let Lynch do whatever the fuck he wants, eh? But this is just so weird and odd, and what? A cat and a rat in a machine and you need to milk it to get an antidote? What the fuck am I watching?
We brought you a little cat, Thufir. You must care for it if you wish to live. A poison has been introduced into your body, Thufir Hawaz. By milking this smooth little cat's body, you receive your antidote.
All of the moments that are very impactful in the novel, once they start rolling ahead in the second part of the film, you just don't even care. I'm not even emotionally invested in Paul or anything that he's doing. He rides a worm and becomes a man, but it's just all so quick, and it's just all the details and the context and the rich world building. Once that's gone, I mean, it's hard for an audience to stay emotionally invested in something that's transpiring so quickly. It's just one big momentous moment to the next, and you're completely uninvested and you're completely out. There's Gurney! He's pugless. What happened to the pug? Did it make it? Did they eat it? I need to know. He's run into battle with a pug in his jacket and now he doesn't have the pug.
Paul! Paul, don't you trust your own eyes?
They said you were dead!
What the fuck is with these transitions? It's like an explosion every time they cut from scene to scene. And what the fuck is with these scenes?
The Emperor will stop him. He won't take the water of life.
That's why they want me killed. They're afraid I'll take the water of life.
I want 50 Legion of Sardaukar on Arrakis at once.
The worm is the spice. The spice is the worm. What? What the fuck is happening? Why am I still watching this?
The worm is the spice. The spice is the worm.
Paul is crying blood. Jessica and Irulan are bleeding from the nose. Gaius Helen Mohim is rolling around and writhing and bleeding. I feel like I'm bleeding from the eyes and ears at this point. I feel like their experience is the experience I'm having while watching this fucking movie, eh? He's the Kwisatz Haderach. He holds all the genetic memories of men and women throughout future, present, and past. Yeah, I get it, but you actually need to explain that to the audience. Grandma watching this in 1984 didn't know what the Missionaria Protectivia was, or what the Water of Life was, or what the Kwisatz Haderach was, or even what the Bene Gesserit was. You need to explain this to the audience. You can't just have this scene and expect people to know what's going on. I think Ilea is a really interesting character and she's very hard to execute on the screen. In the book, she's just this 3-year-old who talks like an adult. And that works in the book, but once you conceptualize that as an image on the big screen, it's gonna look fucking weird. It's just not gonna look right, which is kind of how she's supposed to be. She's off-putting and everyone hates and fears her. But I'll be interested to see how Denny will execute this character in part 2. And I mean, Lynch's movies are already so weird and surreal and fucked up that a little girl who's essentially an adult it's fine. It fits in with this tone, this incredibly weird tone. But yeah, I think that's one of the main hurdles for Denny in part 2.
Kill her.
Get out of my mind! Not until you tell them both who I really am.
So they ride their worms and they attack the Harkonnens and they're shooting their weirding modules and there's explosions and the climax is fine, I guess. If anyone's still watching the fucking movie by this point, or if they're invested in anything that is fucking happening. I have to say, the Baron's death is amazing. In the book, Ilea just slashes him and there's a poison on the blade and he like awkwardly slumps into his suspensors and it's just kind of hanging there in the air, which is great. But yeah, because the Harkonnens in this are fucking hammy as fuck, cheesy to the max. He spins around and he screams and he smashes through a wall and he flies out and it's fucking a piece of art, yeah? There's the bug! Where was he this whole time? Gurney had him. And now one of Paul's sons is holding him? I think that's one of Paul's sons. Or it's just some random kid. Either way, there's a shot of a pug at the end. I don't know whether it's the same pug or a different pug, but I have no idea how that pug survived Gurney's fucking 3-year journey in the desert, fighting fucking Sardaukar and trading and stuff. We need to see that movie. We need to see David Lynch do the sequel where it's the same timeline, but all we do is follow the pug. Surrealistic, David Lynch-esque pug escapades. Take my fucking money. So Herbert's main message behind Dune was never to trust charismatic leaders. Even people who mean well at the beginning will always get corrupted by power. And the first book is very much the build-up of the hero myth, this archetype, and then Dune Messiah is a complete deconstruction of it, and Paul is just the biggest piece of shit ever. But I understand in this 2-hour runtime, this one theatrical movie where they're just like, Paul actually is the prophet. They don't really care about the main message of Herbert's novel, which is, you know, it's a shame. Because the whole prophecy and Mardib and all that, the Protectivia Missionaria Protectiva, that was a Bene Gesserit lie that they put on this tribal culture to try and create this false myth. And in the film, Paul just actually uses the weirding voice without the weirding module and like destroys Sting, and he actually makes it rain at the end, so he is actually this myth and this hero and this archetype. It's funny too that it rains, because that would just kill the sandworms and completely destroy the spice, and then the entire universe would just collapse in on itself and not be able to function anymore. But you know, once again, it's just they're not paying enough attention to the source material. They're making a fucking 80s action movie and they're trying to condense this massive fucking book into 2 hours. So I understand, but as a fan of the novel, this is a horrible, horrible adaptation which completely misses the point, and then the ending is baffling because Paul is actually the Messiah, the Mardib, and he kills the fucking worms. What the fuck? In conclusion, I think one of the main aspects that I find egregious in media is when they're just sterile and generic and boring. This film is never those things. It's never boring. In fact, it's crazy and insane and fucked up and confusing and incomprehensible for anyone not familiar with the source material. It's fucked up and surreal and in points with the Harkonnens trying to deliberately make the audience uncomfortable. I'm glad it exists. I don't hate it. I don't feel any anger towards it. Now that Denny's version exists, it's not as much of a missed opportunity as it is just an interesting oddity that exists. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not a great adaptation of the book. It completely misses the point and rushes through the second half of the book, which is kind of the main crux of the narrative. Also, objectively, it's not a good film. It's completely nonsensical to anyone who hasn't read the book, and completely nonsensical to people who have read the book. So it's failed, but that's fine. I mean, it's something. It's David Lynch's Dune. I'm glad it exists. I love David Lynch. Yeah. It's hard to sum up. It's hard to quantize, right? What is this movie? I guess the easiest way to sum it up is it's a fucking nightmare of a mess. Alright, thank you all for watching. Really how about if you could like, subscribe, and comment what you think of this film, because I think some people do like it, but a lot of people fucking hate it. Thank you all for watching. Good night.